Hello, Discover Church, and all the YouTube followers. I have here with me someone really special. I have a presidential candidate running in the Republican primary. His name is Ryan Binkley, and he's got a very dynamic background. He's both a pastor and businessman, and now a politician. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great, Pastor Steve. Thanks for having me. It's great to be with you, and hello from now Iowa, but it's great to be with you.
Ryan, you said that you had a kind of a message from God about the storm. Can you tell us about this?
About a week ago, I had a dream where I was on a large cruise ship, and I was in a large room, and there was waves coming over the bow of the boat and over the edge of it. And the ship was really interesting. It wasn't rocking back and forth, and the waves weren't coming in my room either. So there was some stability there, but the captain had us bring the cruise ship on into port. And then, in fact, all the cruise ships out in the sea came to port. And then it was so much so that they were recommending everybody in the city leave. And so when I had that dream, I really thought it was about the coming financial storm. So I've been sharing this, and of course, it could be prophetic in both ways. This was before the news came out about the hurricane in Florida a few days. And so that's what I thought it was about. It obviously could have been about both. But I feel like we're entering a storm. What we're seeing in Florida, I think, is just another prophetic sign of what's happening. You know, our country is in trouble. You know, whenever you start seeing judgments, I would say, on the land, and in Ezekiel, it talks about whenever there's a famine, if there's a plague, or if the Lord raises up an army against you, or if there's wild animals running through your land. These are signs of the children of Israel when they left the Lord. And when I read that, I thought, my goodness, COVID's happened. Most of America is underneath a famine. 11% of the nation is hungry right now, goes to bed with food deficiency. Also, we've seen droughts all over the western part of the United States. And then here we've had we're at war. And this war is not just a judgment on Ukraine. If it was, then we wouldn't be paying for it. So it's really an awakening of the earth that God is trying to get all of our attention to turn back to him. And that's kind of what I feel happening. And obviously, I didn't necessarily interpret that as a natural storm. But I think God's trying to get our attention, and he's just emphasizing that it's time for what you and I talked about earlier, for us to turn back to God, consider his ways, start considering each other at a different level than we are today. And let's ask for God's grace in our land again.
The thing that really strikes my heart when I travel around the United States that's changed a lot, it's noticeable on the West Coast, is the amount of homelessness. And, the idea of social justice, it's something that the left has taken. Do we have a solution for this? Do you think that we as Christians and conservatives, what's the solution to homelessness in America?
Well, you're bringing up something that's just part of the bigger problem that we need here in America, and that's a revival. I had a dream. One of the early dreams I had about running for office came in this kind of way, where somebody came up to me, a reporter came up to me in a dream and put a microphone in my hand in front of my face and said, "Why are you running for president?" And I said, because America needs an economic revival and America needs a spiritual revival. So what you're talking about is a combination of both of these things that could help impact that. And I'm really carrying this message because, spiritually, we're really broken. And we're a nation that's really left God. I'm a pastor, so I can speak to you in this audience here a little bit different. This is a time for us to really pray and see God back in our land. I mean, we have been absolutely kicking him out of schools, kicking him out of public domain places, and even mentioning his name is offensive to so many people. And we've got to acknowledge the fact that God had the greatest message for us all, regardless of what religion you are. And Jesus said it this way: love your neighbor. Love your neighbor was this expression that the church needed to have, that we needed to have. And it's the greatest representation we can have. And I think that if we would start doing more than saying, that many of these issues like homelessness would tend to go away. Because then they ask, well, who's my neighbor? You remember the question? Well, who's my neighbor? Well, who was it? Who did he highlight? The person that was on the street, the person that was hurting the most. And so this is what we've got to get back to. And I think when we do, Pastor Steve, we'll be on our way to that spiritual side. And it's manifested in different ways, but it's one of the key things that we're broken and we need so bad.
Yeah, I want to remind our audience, this is Ryan Binkley running in the Republican primary for the office of president. And you sound like one of the most biblically literate Christian candidates on the ticket out there. It sounds like you believe America is a free and also a country that's founded on Christian principles. I mean, how would you Would you bring the Bible back to public schools? Do you think that's possible, and how would you do that?
Well, it's so interesting that, we're in this moment where we fail to, I think, really teach our children of how important our biblical history is with our founders, and what this means, that we're created by God, and we have inalienable rights in our Constitution by God, our Creator. And so much so that even in our Constitution, we have this not freedom from religion, but freedom of religion. And then we have an express written thing in there that says you have the express right to express your faith in religion. That's in the Constitution. So at no level should we take God out at any place. Now, what the founders didn't want is they didn't want there to be a state religion. If you go back to the times of the king, they had this state religion. They wanted everybody underneath that one church. And that's what they wanted to be free from. But they certainly didn't want us to be able to be free from sharing our faith. Or certainly I don't think they ever envisioned the day where the Pledge of Allegiance is something just saying one nation under God would not even be able to be said, or the 10 Commandments wouldn't want to be visible. So I think it's time that we bring that back. We don't need to oppress people that they have to be able to believe the same we do, but it's good to teach our history, that our founders believed in God. They believed in our Creator. They believed in Christ. And so this is who we are as a nation. It's a wonderful history. It's part of who we are. And I believe it's what God created us to be, a nation that's shining the lamp of liberty, not only to our citizens, but all over the earth. And one of those bright lamps of liberty is the freedom of religion. And so you don't have to be a Christian. That's the wonderful thing about Jesus and the wonderful thing about our country. And I would fight to, for anybody's protection in that regard. But I do believe we need to bring God back into America again.
I've been to over 48 countries, and I tell you, no country protects other people's rights who differ from them better than Christian countries. So I think saying it's a Christian country doesn't exclude other people. And I think that's one of the points you're making, and that's excellent. Look, the last election, the biggest problem was the amount of censorship. We couldn't get to the truth. We couldn't hear the truth. And now they're adding, 4 years later, the extra problem of artificial intelligence. So they're screening out conservative thoughts and Christian thoughts very quickly, in real time. I think this issue should have already been dealt with. We're still facing it. If I put up videos of you or of, very conservative ideas challenging the official narrative, it can get censored right away. It can be taken off. Is this something that is a priority? If you were to be the president, how would you deal with this censorship issue?
You're exactly right. The election, if it was stolen in any way, I believe it was really stolen in the area of big tech and also media, hiding key facts like the Hunter Biden story, or disseminating certain information more than others, or hiding some information that could be helpful to Republicans. And so this is something that we have to address. Clearly, I remember when Google bought YouTube, I remember thinking if I was president, I would have tried to stop that. When Facebook bought Instagram, I would have tried to stop that. These major mergers of big tech have really consolidated big tech into too few players. And when you have an oligopoly of sorts, the way we have it today in big tech, you don't have freedom of thought, and so there's not enough channels out there that truly allow the expression that are big platforms that people are seeing today. And we need to have more of them, and people need to know where to go. And we're going to have to educate people. So if we do get blocked, there needs to be lawsuits, there needs to be protection. And I would fight as president to make sure that your channel, other channels, my channels, people that are expressing faith, do not get blocked. But we have to do more to raise the awareness that this Constitution has and always has been about we the people. And whenever any organization or the government itself is infringing upon the rights of we the people, that's when we the people have to stand up. And that's what I would fight for.
Yeah, this is a message that I think, the secular world might feel like it's scary, it's disturbing, but there is comfort in knowing the future. I think it's important to recognize spiritual things are happening, judgment is clearly happening, and it's in the order of Revelation chapter 6 of the four horsemen, what you refer to with the plague, with the pandemic, that's the white horse. Then you got all these fires and conflicts like Maui. I mean, it's just terribly it's heartbreaking to see what happened to Maui. And then I think the next one is the black horse, which is represented in your dream by the coming financial storm. And I pray that we have some time to prepare for that, because I don't think anybody is ready for a Great Depression. And I don't want to see the homelessness and the what do they call it now? The homeless middle class. What a term. What a term.
Well, Pastor Steve, as you mentioned that's the exact type of word I've been sharing everywhere I go, that we're in far greater economic trouble than what we know. Much more so than anybody in Washington and anybody in DC is letting us know. And here are the signs. Whenever we spend as much money as we're spending, you may know this, we're $32 trillion in debt. The bad news is that we're on track to be $45 to $50 trillion in debt in the next 8 years, which will take our interest payments to about 12 to 14% of our current budget, which would be about as much as we spend on our military. So we don't have the money to make these interest payments. So we have to borrow money from others and ourselves to make these interest payments. And this is what causes inflation today. So I'm telling America, whenever we went $7.5 trillion in debt under President Trump, we're going to do more than that under President Biden. So that $15 trillion extra debt has been printed money. That's money out there in the marketplace. That's why we have 30% higher inflation on mortgages, on rent, on cars, food. So only if you need to drive or eat or sleep does it affect you, right? So this is the impact. But the bad news is we're not even paying attention now to the Fed's resulting effect of raising rates, what that does to the economy. Because when that happens, that's when you see bank failures. We saw 3 bank failures happen earlier this year. And these were as large as 25 of bank failures put together in 2008. So these were big banks. Fed comes in, Joe Biden comes in and says, hey, there's no problem here, go back to work. These are canaries in the coal mine of what's coming if we don't rescue our country. We put together a plan to do just that. I called it a 7-year economic plan. I really based it on the pattern of Joseph. The fact that Joseph went into Egypt and he had a word that they needed to save 20%. Did you know exactly our debt to GDP ratio is we're 125% debt over our GDP, meaning we are spending every year over about 25% more than we bring in as a country. So we actually need to save that 20%. And we've got about 7 years to do it. And I think it's so important for us to get back to we're not borrowing money. And that's part of our plan. When we do, I think we can rescue the dollar and save the next generation financially, because if we don't, our kids and my kids and your kids won't have the same opportunity that you and I have.
Just want to let our audience know again, this is Ryan Binkley, a presidential candidate on the Republican ticket running in the primary right now. And you are uniquely qualified because you're not only a Christian, a pastor, but you've got a lot of business experience people might not know about. And you seem to be drawing from that. Can you tell us just a little bit about your business background?
Well, so, I started off in business out of college in 1990 from the University of Texas. And I went to work with Procter & Gamble, Boston Scientific. Then I got in the technology industry. And then I felt a call to ministry. And so that's when I got married and we came on staff at our church in Atlanta. We were doing urban ministry, missions, young adult ministry. In fact, I thought I would be doing that forever. Then a tragedy hit my home. My older brother was killed by a drunk driver 22 years ago. And then God really spoke to us about coming back, being in Dallas, being with my dad in the business he had and helping out. So I went back and got my MBA. We spun off that company he had, and then we started an investment bank 20 years ago. And now it's grown. We have about 400 employees and about 4 different companies ranging from strategic growth, software engineering, wealth management, and middle market mergers and acquisitions. We have helped probably merge about 1,400 businesses together in the last 20 years. Our team has, and probably about $8 billion worth of net worth released into people's lives. So this is my expertise of looking at the economy, markets, and how it relates to businesses and their growth patterns and when to sell. And so I see it through that lens, and I know really I believe what we can do about it. And it's not going to be easy, Pastor, but I'm going to have to look into the camera of America as president and tell Americans that, listen, we're in more trouble, but we can come through it. But we have to get out of our disagreement and be willing to make some small cuts. And this is going to take some sacrifice on all of our ends, but we can grow through this. We don't have to just cut everything. There's some strategic growth. It's like pruning. Right now, the government doesn't know how to prune. They never cut a thing. we can cut some things that are wasteful that we don't need, and actually we'll grow more. And that's what I plan to do.
These are the end of days, what the Bible says.
Well, I did not know that you founded an investment bank. Did I hear that correctly?
Yes, I co-founded it.
Wow. I mean, if there's any form of slavery going on in America right now, it's financial slavery. And this is the big one. And many prominent Christians talk to me about, is there a way to form a bank so that we can provide some other avenue, some other platform for people to be free from debt? So this is an amazing qualification that you have.
Well, there are a lot of good banks out there. You have to research to find them. And I think you need to really be looking at their assets and their balance sheet and make sure you're exploring that. And make sure you don't put more than $250,000 because that's the FDIC requirement, the lid on it, so to speak. I think we could have some danger for people out there that have businesses with more than that in every account. They need to diversify and use more wisdom than ever before.
That's really good advice. Have you any policy, any thoughts on crypto? Would you regulate it? Are you a friend, or how do you feel about crypto?
The real reason crypto has become so popular is because we've really mismanaged the US dollar. When you think about what really drives people to that in recent years, it's because we've not stewarded the management of our money. In fact, we print so much of it. We treat the US dollar like monopoly money now. We just print more of it. And so what happened is people got tired of that. They're like, wow, let me buy a Bitcoin. Well, there's only so many of Bitcoins. And actually, I know the government's not just printing more of these, or it has some sort of stability to it. And I can, it has traceability factors to it. So there's some elements to it that bring security to people outside of the US dollar. That said, I don't believe that there should be significant transactions that are happening outside of viewership, for you to be able to have another sub-market, so to speak, because we need fairness and equity in the marketplace. Those things being held equal. The big problem is that we're not healthy as a country. The US dollar is losing its place as the world's reserve currency. And the reason is because we keep doing what we're doing, borrowing too much money, printing more money, and China and all these other countries now are developing their own currencies to trade with. We used to be, I think, have international trade in about 71% of international transactions. Now it's 50, 58%, something like that. And it's going down because we're a poor stewardship.
Hey, let's move on to a topic that's very important to the voters, is corruption, government corruption. One of the signs for us of government corruption is the whole January 6th narrative and the indictment of former President Trump. How do you feel about the indictments? Do you perceive them as political prosecutions?
Absolutely. If you go back and you look at the Durham report, which came out really 1 month in May, right before Smith offered all these indictments down, they basically admitted, that all the Russia investigation that was not done according to policy, that there was bias against President Trump. And then 1 month later, all these other indictments come down. So the timing of them appear very political. Now, I want to be very clear as I say this, because it's important to know this, that, a lot of these also were avoidable. Some of the decisions that President Trump made and how he went about some of these things, he has the right to express his dissatisfaction. He has his right to express his concerns. But there are some areas where, you could have used better leadership. I would say that in many of these cases. I'm not saying he broke the law. I'm not saying they were worthy of indictments. I'm saying some of these could have been avoided, particularly Georgia could have been avoided if it was probably handled a little bit different way. But that said, I know these are political. And what we have is two systems of injustice here in our country, and we've got to get rid of it. We can see it the way, the Department of Justice treats Hunter Biden. They kind of work out a little sweetheart deal with him, and they're really coming down hard on President Trump. So this is where the dichotomy is, and we've got to end it once and for all. President Trump does not deserve to have all these indictments that he has. I don't think some of the decisions he made should have led to hardly any of these. He's got the ability to express his opinion. They're hitting him on a lot of things that, just quite frankly, moving boxes from one room to another, unless he did something very serious with them, which I don't know all the underlying principles. then these shouldn't be there. I think that in large part they're political.
They've got over 90 charges, 4 indictments. They're going to try to get him on something. If you were president, would you pardon Mr. Trump?
If everything looks as political as it does today, yes. If there was something that was much more significant, or like he sold data, or he did something, he really was the mastermind behind creating some sort of corruption, then that might be different. But everything that I've seen today, absolutely yes.
That's great. One of your Republican candidates, Vivek Ramaswamy, he said the way that he would deal with government corruption is he would use his presidential power to shut down the Department of Education, the EPA, the IRS, the FBI. I mean, those are pretty radical thoughts. But the corruption is so deep, people are very disenchanted. We were waiting for draining the swamp. What do you think about these ideas?
Well, I have a totally different philosophy. There is a reaction that a lot of times people have to certain things. When something goes bad, well, let's just shut it down, or let's get rid of it. I remember 2 years ago in the summer of 2020, when many people were crying for the defunding of the police department because there were some bad policemen. And we as Republicans were like, no, we don't need to defund the police. What we need is good policemen. We need good leadership in there. And now when it's on the other side of the foot, we've got a bad, leadership at the CIA, bad leadership at the FBI, bad leadership in the Department of Justice. We're like, let's defund everything. Let's get rid of it, or I'll lay off 15,000 employees and reassign another one. And I have 5 businesses, so I've got different companies, and some of them have or divisions as well that have 100 people in them, 50 people in them, and these are good divisions. But if I had a problem, a cultural problem, an integrity problem, you're either firing all the people or you're firing the leader. And so he's making a decision, hey, I'm going to fire everybody. They're not needed. Well, I know that's not true, because the FBI solves a lot of thousands and thousands of hard to solve crimes, murders a year. The FBI has helped me in business over a decade ago, at a time when I was being bribed. There's good that they do. And so I'm not one of those leaders that says, hey, now that there's bad, let's just throw everything away. I'm one of those leaders that would say, let's put the right leader in. There may be some cutting all of them need. I would think the Department of Education, there's some trimming all of them may need. But that's different than having good leadership that helps protect Americans and shares core values of integrity, doing the right thing. I mean, having harmony and agreement, but also just sticking to the law. Right now they're doing things based more on political persuasion. We do not need to have any leader in place that does that.
As a pastor, I couldn't agree with you more. I think we have to pull back. And are we hearing things that conservatives just want to hear, like it's tickling our ears? We're going to dismantle everything, we're going to drain the whole swamp. Or do we take some responsibility and say, everything rises and falls on leadership? It sounds a lot like a book I'm just reading, Extreme Ownership. I don't know if you've read that, but we need to take extreme ownership. It's written by Marines, and about how when things go bad in war, everyone's looking for a head to chop and who to blame. And in the end, he realized as a leader of the team, he's the one to blame. You got to deal with the leadership, but not just dismantle the whole platoon. So I think that's from my church experience, that's really true. You've got to look at the leadership and not just dismantle ministries and departments, unless they're really dysfunctional. Another sign of corruption in the highest places is the never-ending wars of America, which now is focused on Ukraine. Would you continue to fund Ukraine, and how would you solve the age-old problem between the U.S. and Russia?
This is one of the most difficult things that I would face as president today, but I want to tell you how I would lead this. The United States of America I really believe this, is called to be a lamppost of freedom here for our country, but we're also supposed to shine that light of freedom for other nations to see what a nation with democratic and capitalistic principles, freedom principles, looks like. Now you've got countries that are trying to embrace that all the more. Taiwan's one of those that has 3 times the wealth per capita that China does. Ukraine has, democratic principles, and it's not perfect. It's a new country. There's a lot of corruption in there. But I have to tell you, there's a lot of corruption in our country 100 years ago as well, 200 years ago as well. So this is a new country. I would stand for freedom. I would stand in, and I would certainly would not allow Putin to just go run shod through Europe. I would not let him rebuild the Eastern Bloc. But I'd also recognize that he has some real concerns. His concerns, I think, long term have been NATO over the last 20 or 30 years has been creeping closer to his border, and it's been moving more towards him all the time. And I think that we need to be able to address them. And so I would bring NATO leaders together to sit down with Putin and try and really reassure him that their borders are secure, that we have no intention of invading Russia, and that there's other ways for them to succeed and have prosperity other than taking over Ukraine. I think they looked at Ukraine as a breadbasket. I think they looked at Ukraine in the time of Joe Biden as a leader, seeing him basically run out of Afghanistan as an opportunity. And I think the Ukrainians surprised President Biden. I think they've surprised Russia and Putin himself, and they fought harder. That said, I would bring an end to this war. I am not for endless wars. And so I would never enter into war unless we had a strategic exit out of it. But when it comes to funding, right now, I'd require NATO to pony up their fair share, European countries to pony up more. This is in their backyard, not our backyard. And in the meantime, I'd be working towards a diplomatic way to end this, where both parties could somehow come out of there feeling like this was a win. And that's what negotiation is. I think it's going to be time to do that. I would give Zelensky and Ukraine likely some more weapons to try and succeed. But at the end of the day, we have to bring security and peace to that entire region.
Well, if you're president, you're definitely going to deal with Vladimir Putin. He's one of the long-standing leaders out there on the world stage. I want to read a quote by Putin. In 2017, he did an interview with French newspaper Le Figaro, and he said, "I've already talked with one US president, and with another, and with the third. Presidents come and go, but the policy does not change. Do you know why? Because the power of the bureaucracy is very strong. The person gets elected, he comes in with some ideas, then people come to him with briefcases, well-dressed and in dark suits, and they begin to explain what he should do. And everything changes at once. And this happens from one administration to the next." Now, granted, he said this before he met President Trump. I don't know. I don't think Biden is included in this. But are you concerned that you will be unable to maintain, your Christian ideals and your strong agenda under the pressure of a powerful Washington apparatus?
No, not at all. I'm not saying there won't be pressure. I'm not saying there won't be attacks. I'm saying that Christ is the center of my life. And, with my wife and our family, he is our Savior and he's our Lord. And so there's going to be nothing that we're ever going to do that's going to violate that centerpiece of our heart and our soul. And I think America is looking for a leader that has some sort of true north that still works. It feels like we've had leaders with that compass, but it's broken, like that compass that doesn't point anywhere because the magnet doesn't point to true north anymore. I don't think Washington has a true north. I don't think that leaders we've had is a true north. And so politicians end up getting bought by lobbyists or corruption takes over. This is something we have to hold dear to. If God puts me in that spot, I will know that he put me there. And I'll know that it's his guidance and wisdom that will lead us to a place of prosperity. And I would stay centered on that point. And I would defend that point to the American people, no matter what it costs, for us to stand with each other, stand on our Constitution, and stand with the principles of God in our lives and what that means. Now, when you have corrupt leadership in Russia, it's easy for them to point the finger at some of the weaknesses of our country. But some of the weaknesses of our country are also some of our strengths. The Constitution is, I call it a burdensome thing sometimes, because boy, wouldn't you just like to change some things? Oh, but for that Constitution that makes you really weigh it out before you can make a change on voting laws, or before you make a change on, and it takes an amendment to change that Constitution. So things may move slower, but look at the prosperity, look at the success of our nation. And I think Putin should have a lot of things to learn from our country.
Well, this is Ryan Binkley running on the Republican primary for president. And I want to thank you for your time, sir. It's been really enlightening, and I hope our audience will go to your website and take a look at you. Would you remind us of your website?
Binkley2024.com. And Pastor Steve, I want to thank you for having me. And also want to encourage everybody to go to the website and see a couple things. You know, if God's going to come back in our country again, he's going to come back because we as Americans are starting to listen to each other and to look at each other the way God does. God has an answer for the hurting, for the poor, for the immigrants, for young people. In fact, these are overlooked people that's all throughout Scripture that are so important to God. And I'm carrying a message as a candidate for the Republican Party and as president, because I believe this is an overlooked area in our party. I believe that we haven't had a message for the poor, for the urban America, for the disparity in education for the poor and the minorities. And I am going to fight for that. And so I believe there's another way to do it. It's not big government. It's not more money, but it's a movement of love, volunteerism, service. That's a love your neighbor movement. And I think we can change the culture of America when we do that. And that's why I'm running, to truly bring God in our country again, but through a unique way of good stewardship financially, and then through loving each other culturally. So you'll find more of that in there.
Well, I think that's one of the most radical thoughts that another revolutionary presented was love your neighbor as yourself. It's far more radical than people realize. That's great.
It is.
Well, thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you. We enjoyed the interview. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Look forward to seeing you again. Bye-bye.
Join an international online church community that's tuned into prophecy. Become an active collaborator. Choose care groups and discipleship paths designed for your spiritual growth, and get involved in daily prayer, all in one app. You'll also get full weekly sermons uncensored by big tech. Ministry partners can download our app now at discoverchurch.online. That's discoverchurch.online. Activate your faith and let's meet online.